I am delighted to welcome Gavin Esler to the Brilliant Minds Bunker today. Gavin is an award-winning television and radio broadcaster, journalist, and author of 5 novels and 2 non-fiction books. Gavin, welcome to the bunker.
I'm very glad to be here.
Fantastic. Gavin, you were born in Glasgow, but moved to Edinburgh, where you began your education. Can you tell me a little bit about your upbringing and its influences on the person you are today?
Yes, I was born in a family that had a council house in Clydebank, and I suppose the biggest formative experience of my life was one I don't remember at all, which was when I was 3 weeks old. I nearly died and was taken to a hospital, had an operation, and I came back to the house where we shared with my grandmother and my mother and father and 2 aunties at the time before moving to Edinburgh. And from the moment I was able to notice that I got a scar on my belly, my grandmother used to say to me, you know, you're really lucky. If you'd been born when I'd been born, you'd have been dead because we wouldn't have been able to afford an operation. And so I grew up in a family which was essentially aspiring working class conservatives from Glasgow who also recognized the benefits of the state doing certain things, providing council houses for people who had been bombed out during the war, providing healthcare for people like me who didn't know what was going on. And I've always felt that those 2 things, holding those 2 ideas in my head, was one of the most important things that had ever happened to me, that we've all got personal responsibility to get on and do things, but we've also got to think, what can we do together that's better than what we can do individually?
Now, you've had an incredible career in broadcasting and journalism. Looking back, were there any career-changing moments for you, significant times?
The first big career-changing moment was when I decided I wasn't going to be a doctor, because I grew up, of course, thinking that the ultimate, was to be in medicine some way. When I was about 17, I decided I wanted to be a writer. I'd been doing a lot of writing. And so that for me was the biggest change. And instead of going to Edinburgh University, which I'd planned to do, I then went to a couple of English universities, read English and was a postgraduate in Irish literature. And so that was the biggest change. And the next biggest change was I was offered a job on the Scotsman newspaper, which was then in a company which owned a number of other newspapers. And I said, oh, gosh, that sounds really boring. And there was a sort of stunned silence. And I said, I understand you own the Belfast Telegraph. Can I go to Belfast instead? And they didn't have anybody who wanted to go to Belfast, so I got the job.
Fantastic. So how long did you spend over there?
Quite a long time. I didn't spend very long in the Belfast Telegraph. I spent about 18 months in Belfast Telegraph, and then I spent a couple of years in the BBC in Northern Ireland, which was great. I mean, I go back to Northern Ireland a lot. I love it. I think it's a fantastic place. In fact, all of Ireland is lovely, but I'm really, really fond of Belfast, which not everybody was, let's put it that way, particularly when I was there, but I really liked it.
Now, you've met and interviewed some extraordinarily high-profile individuals, from Bill Clinton, Angela Merkel, Dolly Parton, even Angelina Jolie, I believe. And as a result, you wrote an interesting book inspired by these conversations called Lessons from the Top. I'm really interested to understand what you've learned from interviewing people like this about storytelling. It's something people talk about a lot these days. And I just wondered if you'd learned anything specifically around that.
I learned a number of things, actually. I learned it's very important to have hard skills to be able to do things, but it's also important to be able to communicate that you do things. And you can't, if you have one without the other, you're not going to be very effective as a leader. And so I looked at those leaders and some others that I'd met, Tony Blair, Margaret Thatcher, and others, and tried to think, what do they all have in common? And what they all have in common is they tell 3 basic stories. The first basic story is the human one. Who are you? Who am I? And Mrs. Thatcher said, I'm the grocer's daughter from Grantham, which is one of the best 5 or 6 word stories you can imagine. It's really perfect, isn't it? Daughter, not a son, a grocer's daughter. I'm not very posh, and I'm from Grantham. I'm not part of the metropolitan elite. And then the second story they tell is, who are we as a group? So in her case, it was who the Conservative Party was, or who Britain is, or in Bill Clinton's case, it was, we're the new Democrats. We're not the fusty old Democrats. We're something different. And then if you're still listening, you get on to the third one, which is where's my leadership going to take us? And I think a number of leaders make mistakes here. Ed Miliband was a very smart guy, but he never connected on the very first thing. Who are you exactly? Whereas other leaders like Boris Johnson's another one who has got a great kind of story about who he is. You know, I'm not all that earnest. I'm a bit of a lad. But these are very serious times, and that story doesn't really connect now. And what we do ask in his case is, where are the hard skills? What are you actually managing to do? Have you ever built that garden bridge? Have you ever done any of these things? So stories are really important, but they're a very big part of the picture, and telling them is very important too. It's true of businesses also.
That's interesting you mentioned Boris, excuse me. The other non-fiction book, of course, you've written is called Brexit Without the Bullshit, which I believe was published last June. Does everything you wrote in that book still stand in a sort of post-COVID-19 environment?
Sadly, yes, actually. I mean, we're looking at doing a potentially another edition where I'll write a few extra things. But all the things that we said were still true, because we have not got Brexit done. It is obviously not done. And just to take some examples, I said in the book last year, look, 95% of the vets in British abattoirs who certify the stuff we eat as fit to eat are EU 27 citizens. That's going to be a problem. I said in the book, when it comes to harvesting, things like asparagus in particular, we stopped growing asparagus in England up into 2004. And then when East European workers were available, we started to grow it again because the farmers could get people to pick it. Guess what? Some farmers have had to fly in Romanians during the coronavirus crisis to pick spring asparagus. So in fact, nothing has changed. The idea that we have got Brexit done simply isn't the case, because it was never an event. It was always going to be a process, and a very long process. So the idea of bunging a bob for a Big Ben bong and other kind of nonsense is simply that. It is celebrating an event when we're in the middle of something which is going to go on for years.
And do you think COVID-19 is affecting trust in journalism and the media? I mean, there's so much going on at the moment, but, you know, what do you think about that?
I think COVID-19, sadly, I think one of the problems with Brexit is it started to pull the country apart. Not just remain and leave, but Scotland and Northern Ireland want to go a very different way. And I think that's going to be one of the stories in the future. COVID-19, I would have thought, would pull us all together, because we all want the same thing. We all want not to get sick. We don't want people to die. We want to find a cure. Everybody wants that. Everybody wants it. But different parts of the UK are going different ways. And we've now found that, you know, local government, even in England, is saying to Boris Johnson, we're not actually going to open the schools when you say. So that's part of it. And in a divided country, I think the job of the media, there is no, it's not a monolith. You know, it's full of very, very different people with different attitudes. And the job is to hold power to account. And in a divided society, it's going to reflect those divisions. So in that sense, it's doing well. There are other things where one of the things that I find is a bit of a bugbear is the idea of balance, which affects television in particular. And balance used to be, you have a conservative and you have Labour, or in Northern Ireland, you would have a unionist and a nationalist. But balance is not having someone who knows what they're talking about when it comes to coronavirus and having someone who's got an opinion but has got no qualifications. Now, that doesn't mean to say experts don't disagree. Of course they do. But I do listen to quite a lot of programs where people are just wittering on about coronavirus or Brexit or trade policy, and they don't really know what they're talking about. And I think that is a problem for the media.
Now, you've recently released a podcast series called The Big Steal, which I was listening to, by the way, fascinating. And that's all around the world's most successful criminal, Vladimir Putin. I'm sure you learned a huge amount when you did that podcast series, but was there anything surprising that you learned when you were doing it?
Yes, a lot of things, actually. One of the things was just how much money is involved. And we tried to follow the money. That's why we call it the big steal, because basically we were looking at how Russia went from communism to effectively a kleptocracy in one generation. And the character of Vladimir Putin is fascinating. I went to Dresden, where he was a KGB colonel during the Cold War. When the wall came down, I talked to a guy who was later became mayor of Dresden, but was one of the student activists who went into the Stasi secret police headquarters and said, guys, get out, give us your guns and go away. And then he went round the corner to the KGB headquarters in Dresden. And the door opened and a man, Russian man, came out and said in perfect German, it's okay, we're packing up, we're leaving, but if any of you come in here, we're going to shoot you all. That was Vladimir Putin. And so it kind of explains how he's quite cool, he's very ruthless, and he knows what he wants, which is whatever is best for Vladimir Putin.
Gosh, unbelievable. I mean, do you think, you know, absolute power for long periods of time makes a person blind to risk and devoid of self-awareness? I mean...
I don't think he was the world's most empathetic person to begin with, Alice, to be honest. But, you know, you've got a point. But I think the thing with him is he is trying to stay in power, make sure he could stay in power to 2036. But he's in some difficulty now, not just with coronavirus, but with the oil price and other things. And the reason he wants to stay in power is simply, if you're him, what else do you do? If you leave and some new Vladimir Putin takes over, they're going to take all your money off you, and maybe even worse. I mean, he is the guy who put Russia's richest man, Mikhail Khodorkovsky, in a cage in a show trial. He doesn't want to end up in a cage.
No. We're running out of time, I'm really sorry. But look, one final question. Knowing what you do now, if I were to put you into another 10 weeks of lockdown, would you do anything differently?
Well, what can I say? Well, I live on the Kent coast. So if the lockdown included that my exercise over the summer is jumping in the sea, actually, I would be, I'm very lucky. I'm very lucky. I'm not living in a flat in the center of a big city. So I would probably continue to write. I'm writing a new book and I'm nearly finished, I hope, the first draft. So I probably would do most things the same, I think.
Fantastic.
I'll have to think about that. Please don't let me have another 13 weeks in lockdown now.
Gavin, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for chatting to us in the Brilliant Minds Bunker today, and good luck with that next book. I look forward to hearing all about it. Gavin Esler, many thanks.
Thanks, Alice.